My name is Jason, and I am a devout Christian. Faith has always played an important role in my life, guiding me in every decision I have made. However, this strong faith has led me into a challenging marriage. It all started the day I met Emily. It was an ordinary church event, and after the event, my colleague introduced me to Emily, whose gentleness and kindness attracted me at first sight. We talked for a long time, and were surprised to find that we shared the same beliefs and values. At that moment, I seemed to have found my other half. Over the next few months, Emily and I grew very close to each other. We prayed together, attended church activities together, and shared our visions for the future. Her presence in my life made my ordinary life colorful. I began to believe that God brought her to me so that I could find true love. 3 months later, with the blessing of our friends and family, we entered the marriage hall hand in hand. Standing in front of the altar, we made a sacred promise that we would love each other in good times and bad, and that we would go through it together. At that moment, I sincerely believed that our marriage would be like all the beautiful love stories, and that we would live happily ever after. However, reality is not a fairy tale. Soon after our marriage, I began to vaguely feel that there were some subtle differences between us. At first, I thought it was just a normal bonding process between newlyweds, but as time went on, these differences seemed to become more and more difficult to ignore. I remember one time when we were discussing our future life plans, Emily mentioned that she would like to stay home full-time to take care of her family, while I thought we should both continue to work to save more for our family's future. Although we agreed in the end, this discussion was the first time I realized that we did not have the same expectations for life. Things like this happen all the time. From the division of household chores to the use of money, it always takes a lot of time and effort to come to an agreement. Although we could always find a compromise, the process was exhausting. I began to wonder if we really had an unbreakable bond. What makes me feel even more uneasy is that sometimes Emily gets mad at me for little things. For example, once I was so busy with work that I forgot about our date. Although she forgave me afterward, I could feel her disappointment and anger. Similar things happened again and again, and these quarrels were like a sharp thorn in my heart. I began to wonder if our marriage was still as good as when we first met. Thus, in my marriage with Emily, hidden conflicts began to grow quietly. On the surface, we are still a loving couple, but only we know that behind this seemingly perfect marriage, there are a lot of unknown differences and hidden worries. I don't know how much longer we can go on like this. I only know that I have to find a way to repair the increasing cracks between us. Otherwise, our marriage will eventually be hard to escape the fate of broken. It felt like standing on a road that was drifting away, watching each other go farther and farther away, but being powerless to stop it. I began to wonder if the vow was just an impulse. During the second year of our marriage, the hidden cracks began to show, and Emily's increasingly controlling nature began to dominate every aspect of our lives. At first, the change wasn't so noticeable. Emily would scrutinize what I was wearing before I left the house, making suggestions about colors and combinations. I remember one time I wore a green shirt, and she said it made me look like a walking plant. Another time, I chose a dark blue tie, but she thought it was too boring and asked me to change it to something more energetic. Gradually, these suggestions became mandatory. I remember one time, I wore a shirt she didn't like. She was furious, directly cut the shirt, and said it was for my own good. Since then, there were no more clothes in my closet that I liked. All of them were chosen for me by Emily. Emily's control over the household grew tighter and tighter. She created a detailed list of chores, specifying what each person should do at each time. At first, I tried to participate in some of the decision-making, but every time I disagreed, she would take offense. I remember one time when I suggested we go for a walk in the park on the weekend, but she was adamantly against it, saying it would disrupt her plans. Another time, I suggested that we take turns cooking, but she scoffed, saying she didn't feel comfortable leaving the kitchen to me. Slowly, I realized that obedience was the best way to avoid conflict. Over the course of a year or so, my position in the family changed from that of husband to that of puppet, and I followed Emily's orders in all matters. To add to my misery, our sex life began to suffer, with Emily refusing intimacy for any reason, and even a simple hug became difficult to obtain. I clearly remember that once, On the night of our first wedding anniversary, I tried to make out with her, but she said she was too tired and turned around and went asleep. On another occasion, when I had the courage to make my needs known to her, she told me that I was only thinking about these things, which made me feel ashamed. According to my records, we've only had sex 3 times in the past 6 months, and all of those times were with Emily's consent, and I've lost all control as a husband. I have tried to communicate with her about this, but each time it ends in an argument. In the face of all this, I feel extremely confused and helpless. As a devout Christian, I always believe that all conflicts can be resolved through communication and understanding. I tried to have many long talks with Emily, hoping to get to the root of the problem. I remember one time we talked for 3 hours. I patiently listened to her voice her grievances, expressed my apologies, and promised to make changes. But the next day, everything went back to the way it was, as if the conversation had never happened. Another time, I even wrote a long letter detailing the problems in our marriage, expressing my feelings and expectations. But when she read it, she just said coldly, "I don't want to talk about it," and threw the letter in the trash. Every time, my efforts seemed to be like a stone sinking into the sea without a sound. I clearly remember that I missed our wedding anniversary because I was too busy working. When I apologized to her, she sneered and said, "I knew you didn't care about the family. You only care about yourself." I have heard this kind of words many times, each time like a sharp knife, piercing my heart. According to my rough count, in the past year, Emily criticized and denied me at least 300 times, which happened every day on average. I, on the other hand, never seemed to do anything right. Little by little, I began to doubt myself, our marriage, and even my faith. Why did God put me through this? What had I done wrong? I kept praying for guidance, but it seemed that even God was blind to my plight. I began to have frequent nightmares of Emily leaving me and of me dying alone. According to my records, for the past 2 months, I had these nightmares almost 2 to 3 times a week, waking up each time and tossing and turning, making it difficult for me to sleep. Our relationship is deteriorating. By my count, we've been arguing on average 2 to 3 times a week for the past 3 months. These fights are big and small, ranging from division of labor in the house to life planning. The most heated argument I can remember was when we argued for 2 hours over a shopping decision, with Emily slamming the door and me breaking several plates in anger. Our home had gone from a cozy harbor to a war zone. I felt exhausted, but there was nothing I could do to change it. At the same time, I've noticed Emily and her coworker Jerry getting closer. In the past year, they had worked together 36 times, and Emily and I had spent very little time alone together. I remember one time, I accidentally saw Emily's cell phone and realized that she and Jerry were sending thousands of text messages to and from each other, whereas we were sending less than 10 a month. Another time, I found Emily's credit card statement. There is a whopping $500 of restaurant spending, and that day, she told me she worked late. I didn't want to think about it, but all the signs made me wonder if there was something going on between them that I didn't know about. That's how our marriage got stuck in a quagmire. Our communication turned into quarrels, our love turned into hurt, our trust turned into doubt. According to my estimation, we haven't spoken properly, hugged properly, or smiled properly for more than half a year. We are like two strangers, living under the same roof, sleeping in the same bed, but separated by thousands of mountains. I don't know how far we can go. All I know is that if we don't change, we're going to fall apart. I began to reflect on whether our marriage had been built on a moment of passion. Did we really understand and accept each other? Or did we just fall in love with the reflection of ourselves in each other? I think of our wedding vows, of our beginnings. But those vows, in front of the reality, seemed to be so pale and powerless. I couldn't answer those questions, but I knew that I had to make a choice. Either I would continue to endure, or I would fight, or I would leave. Each choice meant an uphill battle. To endure meant that I had to continue to suppress myself. To fight back meant that I had to face the conflict head-on. To leave meant that I had to bear the pain of loss. But I realized that one day I will have to make a decision about my life. Because it is not only about my marriage, but also about my dignity and self. Guided by my faith, I chose to resist. I decided that I would no longer be submissive, that I would no longer compromise. but that I would face the problem and defend my rights. I knew it would be a tough battle, but I was ready. This was the second year of my marriage, a time that should have been filled with love and sweetness, but instead was overshadowed by control, fighting, and doubt. During the third year of our marriage, my inner turmoil and suspicion grew stronger and stronger. Emily and Jerry's relationship seemed to be more than just co-workers, and I could no longer convince myself that it was just my imagination. The previous year, I had noticed something strange between Emily and Jerry. Their frequent overtime work, secret parties, and the thousands of text messages on Emily's cell phone were all rattling my nerves. But at the time, I chose to trust my wife, chose to attribute everything to the needs of work. However, with the passage of time, more and more facts in front of me, I can no longer deceive themselves and others. First, Emily's behavior became more and more erratic. She began to pay more attention to her appearance, buying new clothes and changing her hairstyle more often. She also began to learn how to put on makeup and spend an hour in front of the mirror every morning. When I asked her the reason for these changes, she always smiled and said it was for work. But I knew that Emily's job didn't require her to dress like this. What disturbed me even more was that Emily began to lie to me. On several occasions, when I called her office, her coworkers told me she was off duty. But when I asked Emily about it, she said she was working late. Another time, I accidentally found a hotel room card in her bag. When I questioned her about it, she was evasive and said it was for a business trip arranged by the company. My heart was full of contradictions and struggles. On the one hand, I didn't want to believe that my wife would betray our marriage, but on the other hand, the evidence in front of me was irrefutable. I started to become more and more sensitive and paranoid, and every time Emily came home late or called, it caused me great panic. Finally, on one of Emily's overtime nights, I made a decision. I opened her computer and checked her email and chat logs. When I saw her conversation with Jerry, my heart sank. The content of their chats went far beyond normal coworker communication and was full of flirting and flirting. Jerry would tell Emily how beautiful she was, and Emily would reply with how much she missed him. They would discuss the time and place of their next rendezvous and recall the details of their last meeting. In the face of this stark evidence, I could no longer lie to myself. My wife, the partner I vowed to spend my life with, was having an affair with another man. This realization, like a sharp blade, pierced my heart. I felt pain, anger, and a deep sense of powerlessness. I didn't understand what was wrong with our marriage, what I hadn't done well enough to make her choose betrayal. Over the next month, I became a complete detective. I began to consciously record Emily's every movement, every phone call, every text message. I installed a GPS tracker in her car and a recording device at home. I even hired a private detective to investigate their relationship. Every new discovery was like a huge stone, weighing heavily on my heart. According to my records, Emily and Jerry had at least 9 private meetings during the month. They would sneak out at work and get a room at a nearby hotel. Their phone records show that they spoke dozens of times a day for hours at a time. During this time, Emily became more and more cold to me, and our communication was almost nil. We were like two strangers, living under the same roof, sleeping in the same bed, but our souls were separated by 1,000 miles. I began to try to confront Emily, hoping that she would give me an explanation, a chance to repent, but every time, she would vehemently deny it, accuse me of being paranoid, and even threaten to leave me. She would yell hysterically, blaming me for everything. I was always speechless under her aggression and could only suffer in silence. It was a never-ending nightmare. I lived in pain and despair every day, wondering how much longer our marriage could go on. I began to wonder if our vows were just a joke, to love and cherish you in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. These promises are so weak and fragile in front of reality. Deep down, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't be so passive and accept the betrayal and deception, and I couldn't let Emily and Jerry hurt me anymore. After a long period of thinking and struggling, I decided to take action and teach them a lesson. Let them taste the price of betrayal. I began to plan an elaborate scheme of revenge. I knew that in order for this plan to work, I had to find Jerry's weakness. Through my observation of Jerry, I realized that he had a fatal weakness. He could not resist the temptation of beautiful women. Whenever he was at a company party or a bar, he was always attracted to pretty girls and did not hide his desire. This gave me an inspiration. In the process of planning my revenge, I met Jane on an online forum about emotional problems, and we talked a lot. And I learned that she had once been betrayed by her boyfriend, and she knew only too well the pain and helplessness she felt. When I told her what happened to me and revealed my revenge plan, she was more than willing to help. She said she hated those who betrayed their partners and hoped that by helping me, she could punish those who were unfaithful. With Jane's support, my plan was put into action. Jane's qualities matched Jerry's type: blonde hair, blue eyes, and a hot body. We agreed that she would play the role of bait to seduce Jerry and make him look bad in front of Emily. Over the next month, Jane and I worked closely together to implement our plan step by step. Jane began to frequent the bars Jerry frequented, deliberately creating chance encounters. She would pretend to be a beautiful woman who was alone, take the initiative to talk to Jerry, and use her charm and intelligence to attract him. Soon, Jerry was hooked. He began to ask Jane out more often and even sneaked out to see her during work hours. I kept a close eye on the situation and continued to gather incriminating evidence on Emily and Jerry. I hired a private detective to follow them. The detective soon captured photos of them cheating in the hotel and recorded their conversations in the hotel room. This evidence is enough to prove their infidelity. In the course of gathering evidence, I also noticed some disturbing aspects of Emily's personality. Every time I tried to communicate with her, she would become very agitated, sometimes even breaking things or slamming doors. She seems to have no control over her emotions, and the slightest thing can trigger her into a rage. This bothers me and scares me, and I'm beginning to worry about what will happen if one day her anger is directed at me. Finally, on a Friday night, my plan came to a head. Emily told me she was working late that night, but I knew she was actually going to the bar with Jerry. I had arranged for Jane to meet them at the bar and seduce them. The night went exactly as I had scripted it, but it turned out to be more than I expected. Jane showed up shortly after Jerry and Emily were seated. Pretending to be drunk, she stumbled towards them and accidentally spilled her drink on Jerry, who immediately got up and tried to help Jane clean it up. At that moment, Jane suddenly kissed Jerry, and Jerry didn't push her away. Emily was so furious that she rushed up to Jane and pushed her away as hard as she could. Jane fell to the floor, hit her head on the corner of the table, and fainted on the spot, with blood pouring out of her forehead. Emily didn't seem to care. She turned around and started yelling hysterically at Jerry, even hitting him. Emily's violent behavior was totally beyond my expectations. She was swinging her fists wildly, hitting Jerry in the head and face, and Jerry was trying to grab her hands, but she was incredibly strong. Other patrons in the bar were shocked by the sudden violence. Some yelled, "Call the police," and others took out their cell phones and started taking pictures or videos. The scene got out of control as the bar's security guards rushed up and tried to separate Emily and Jerry, but Emily's rage seemed to give her so much power that several security guards were unable to subdue her. She screamed, cursed, and smashed bottles and glasses in a horrific and chaotic scene. It wasn't until the police arrived that Emily was finally subdued, and she was still cursing and screaming as she was handcuffed and shoved into the police car. When she was handcuffed by the police and stuffed into the police car, she was still cursing and screaming. Jerry's face was covered with blood. His clothes were torn, and he was in a terrible state. Jane, on the other hand, was taken to the hospital by ambulance. The events of the night changed everything. Emily was detained by the police for drunkenness and assault, and Jerry was hospitalized for his injuries. Their scandalous story went viral on the social media accounts of all the bar's patrons and quickly became the talk of the town. I stood outside the bar, looking at the lights of police cars and ambulances flashing in the night, with mixed feelings in my heart. My plan of revenge seemed to have achieved the desired effect, but I felt an unprecedented emptiness and confusion. I began to question whether what I had done was really right. In the days that followed, Emily's violent behavior made headlines. Her career was ruined and her family was disgraced. Jerry, on the other hand, was fired from his company because of the injuries and the scandal. Their lives were thrown into chaos and despair by the events of that night. After Emily was arrested by the police for a barroom disturbance and assault, I knew that it was time to end the marriage. Before I saw Emily's violent side, I had already made up my mind about divorce. Now, I can't stand the thought of spending my life with someone who is so unstable and violent. Our marriage is completely broken, and there is no way to fix it. I immediately contacted my attorney and informed him of my decision. He expressed his complete understanding and immediately began preparing for the divorce. He told me that given Emily's violent behavior and the evidence of her infidelity, I would be in a very strong position in the divorce proceedings. Over the next few weeks, my attorney helped me prepare all the necessary documents and evidence. We went through all of Emily's and my joint assets, including real estate, cars, savings, investments, and so on. My attorney advised me to seek a larger distribution of assets because Emily's behavior was at fault. When we finally met in court, Emily looked haggard and depressed. Her attorney tried to defend her, claiming that her behavior was the result of alcohol and emotional problems. But these arguments pale in the face of the overwhelming evidence. The judge made his ruling after hearing statements and evidence from both sides. He found that I should receive a larger share of the property, taking into account Emily's fault. In the end, I received 70% of our joint property, including our house and most of our savings, while Emily received 30% of our property and one of our cars. When the judge read the ruling, I felt a strange sense of relief. Although the marriage had ended in such a tragic way, I knew that it was a new beginning for me. After the divorce, I quickly moved out of our former home and started a whole new life. At first, I felt a little uncomfortable. After all, I was used to having a partner around. But gradually, I began to enjoy the freedom and independence. I could live my life on my own terms, without having to conform to the needs and expectations of others. Jane has been a huge support to me during this process. She came to visit me often and helped me adjust to the single life. We would cook together, watch movies together, and work out together. Gradually, I found myself relying on her more and more and enjoying her company. I began to reflect on my life and what I really wanted. I realized that in my past marriage, I had focused too much on other people's needs and neglected my own feelings. I decided that from now on, I would pay more attention to myself and pursue the life I really wanted. I picked up many of my old hobbies and started learning new skills. I started to be more health conscious, exercising regularly and eating healthy. I also started to socialize more with friends and expand my social circle. Gradually, I felt more confident and happier. Now, a year has passed. I've gotten over my divorce and started a whole new life. Jane and I are getting closer and closer. We both went through similar pain, which made us have a deeper understanding and empathy for each other. We decided to give each other a chance to see if we could create a better future together. I look back on the past year with great gratitude. Despite the pain I have experienced, these experiences have helped me to grow, to understand myself better, and to realize what is really important. I have learned how to love myself, how to be independent, and how to face the challenges of life with courage. I share this story in the hope that it will encourage those who are going through similar struggles. I want to tell you that no matter what you are going through, don't give up hope. Life has its ups and downs. It's how we deal with them that counts. As long as we are strong, as long as we believe in ourselves, we will always be able to get through it and find our own happiness. Remember, you are not alone. There are many people in the world who have experienced similar pain, but they all chose to face it bravely and chose to continue to pursue their own happiness. I hope that my story will inspire you and let you know that no matter what happens, life will go on and the sun will always rise again. The most important thing is to love yourself and believe in yourself. Only when we learn to love ourselves can we truly love others and attract those who truly love us. Remember, each of you is unique and valuable. You deserve the best life and the best love. Don't let anyone or anything stop you from pursuing your happiness. This is my story, a story of love, betrayal, growth, and hope. I hope it can give you some encouragement, some inspiration. Remember, there are always challenges in life, but as long as we are strong, as long as we believe, we can always create miracles and find our own happiness. Thank you for listening to me. I sincerely hope that each and every one of you can face life with courage and find your own happiness. Remember, you deserve the best. Love yourself, believe in yourself, and life will smile at you. I wish you all happiness and peace. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.